Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I think I have to. Welcome to the first session on the series of journalism reform and society that we are convening to discuss and to start the discussion or to renew and refresh our thinking and our understanding on the role of journalism, the role of periodical journalism, the role of modern journalism in the development of Malay society and modern Malay civilization. This series will continue every month that we plan. And for every month, we will speak on different topics on journalism, the idea of journalism, on the periodicals and newspapers, and about editors and the problems of journalistic production, and the role of journalists in the Malay archipelago. So our empirical focus will be the Malay archipelago, or the Nusantara, or the Malay world. The Malay world is larger. The Malay world extends across 2 oceans, but our focus will be confined to the peninsula, Malay communities in the northern peninsula, in Sumatra, in Java, Borneo, and the Philippines. So we're looking into the genesis and the development of journalism as an institution, journalism as a profession, journalism as a culture, and journalism as an agent of change and reform over the last more than 100 years. Time-wise, the focus will be before World War II, since from the beginnings of modern journalism in the Malay archipelago to World War II. This period has not been really captured. This is also a response to the neglect and the marginalization of the history of journalism, the social history of journalism, and the sociology of journalism, which should be taught in the universities. Universities have neglected this. One is that journalism schools have not been offering any courses on the history of journalism in Malaysia or in the Malay archipelago over the last 50 years. We're talking about journalism schools in Malaysia. So also the case is quite similar to that of in Indonesia. In the history departments, we have a number of publications based on the interest of historians over the last 5 decades on the study of Malay journalism, because our focus is on Malay journalism. Our focus is on how Malay journalism creates a consciousness among in modern Malay society. So in what we have so far are the works of William R. Roth on the origins of Malay nationalism, and his work on the Malay newspapers and periodicals, which Ahmad referred to, and I've been referring to that, where he listed some more than 200 Malay newspapers and periodicals between 1876 and 1941. So this is an important source. In that book, published in 1967, Roth lists newspapers, and from there we can see editors and journalists. I've listed down more than 100 names between 1876 and 1941. William Roth focuses on the Malaya, Singapore, and Penang. We also have locally from the history departments, we have Ahmad Adam, Professor Ahmad Adam, who is quite prolific in producing works on journalism with regard to creating national consciousness, one of which is the vernacular press in Indonesia, when he argued that it was the vernacular press, it was the press in Indonesia that created Indonesian nationalism. And this is where I think we have been neglecting, because if we talk about the history of Malaysia, one of the instruments that has triggered this feeling of solidarity and unity is the instrument of journalism. Journalism as an instrument from early on. So Ahmad Adam's book on the vernacular press in Indonesia, and his work on the Suara Minangkabau, where he made a thorough study of the various newspapers and the representation and the voices of the Minangkabau toward journalism. It's a very interesting study, a very thorough one. And then another one is Sejarah Surat Khabar, the bibliography, the Alam Melayu. So Adam's work straddles between two countries. It is cross-border. I do not want to I want to deliver that we have to see the history of journalism not from a nation state centric, but within the Malay Archipelago, where there is a common history, a common society, a common past, a common memory. And when you talk about newspapers that was published since the 1870s, they are not only read and circulated within what we understand as particular countries. They cross borders. In other words, well, not there at the time there were no borders, but for example, Jawi Peranakan, so-called the first Bahasa Melayu newspaper in Malaysia, was published in Singapore, but was read in Pulau Pinang, was read in Medan, it was read in Batavia, it was read in Pontianak. They have correspondence in those places. So it was a very cosmopolitan venture, where the newspaper played a role in informing society at that time, from 1876 to 1896, one of the longest running Malay newspapers, about society and culture and life in that part of the Malay Archipelago. In fact, a larger part of the Malay Archipelago, basically the western part of the Malay Archipelago. Also, the newspaper, the so-called, was said to be a radical Malay newspaper, Al-Imam, 1906-1908, very short-lived, by one of which is Sachikan Hadi. Al-Imam, based in Singapore, which created or triggered this consciousness about Islam and modernism, which represents the reform movement, carrying the legacy of Muhammad Abduh, Rashid Ridha, and Jamaluddin Afghani, was read throughout the Malay Archipelago. In fact, there was this connection between Al-Imam and Al-Munir and Al-Manar. Al-Manar is a Cairene-based newspaper. Al-Munir was the equivalent of Al-Imam, published in Padang, Bukit Tinggi. And if you read Hamka's Ayahku, he has a number of chapters telling about his involvement and his father's involvement, Abdul Karim Rahmatullah, in Al-Munir. These were, it's interesting to see how these newspapers triggered a lot of questions on theology, whether it's halal or haram to celebrate the Prophet's birthday, whether qunut is allowed or not. So again, these were debated, and again, these are the role of newspapers. It's not only those questions, but the thinking behind the publication of newspapers. So what we see, and the premise of this series is to share in a small group to interested audience of the significant civilizational role of Malay journalism, newspapers and periodicals over that period. And we may start earlier, in the early 1800s. The genesis of Malay journalism arguably would be Abdullah Munshi, 1820. At that time there was no newspapers, but he wrote essays, he wrote criticisms, and his writings are journalistic. And this was reinforced by the culture in Pulau Penyengat, where the Pulau Penyengat was very progressive and modernist, and the Sultan of Riau Lingga was a patron. He allowed and this establishment of the Rushdiah Club, which encouraged writing and printing. So the idea of printing, the idea of the Madba'ah was established in the Riau Lingga culture. The idea of criticisms, and this was brought to Singapore. And Penang got the legacy from Syed Sheikh Al-Hadi when he moved from Singapore after quite a number of problems in terms of establishing himself in Terengganu and Melaka to Pulau Pinang. And he was there, and from there, there's so many newspapers that carried the reform agenda. So this is what we're trying to do in ISTAC. My colleague, Dr. Mehmet, Ozay, and myself, we decided to team up and to create a discourse on journalism in the Malay Archipelago, not in Malaysia or Indonesia, but to see the connections, to see the movements of ideas and people, especially between the Peninsula and Sumatra before World War II, and how we reinforce and we shape one another over the years, over the decades. So this series will continue hopefully for about 1 year, alternate, and perhaps in between we'll call others to speak. Also, the topic that we've chosen today is Ahmad Ismail and Haji Muhammad Said. I was asked just now why these two. It is more of a coincidence rather than a planned deliberation. It so happened that my colleague was studying Haji Muhammad Said and press in Indonesia, in North Sumatra, in Aceh. One of his areas is the cultural history of the Malay Archipelago, and exactly what I was looking for with regard to somebody who can engage in and who can talk about the press from the other side, or rather the press from across the streets. And Ahmad Ismail, because I was working on Ahmad Ismail in various ways, one of which is that I was promoting the name of Ahmad Ismail to be labeled as the school, Ahmad Ismail School of Journalism and the Faculty of Communication and Journalism in ITM. That is one. I've been advocating for that. And also I'm involved in the creating or supporting for a chair, professional chair, Ahmad Ismail professional chair on journalism. So I thought that it's relevant for us to take Ahmad Ismail. But there are other reasons why we chose the two is because we want to tell that journalists are also intellectuals. They are not just reporters who write for the papers. I think one of the things that I would want to advocate is that there is in Malaysia, not Indonesia, perhaps in recent times, a very condescending position in society and by intellectuals in Malaysia, professors, scholars, who look down on the institution of journalism. They say that journalism is biased, shallow, useless to the nation. It has created more problems to Malaysia than what it should be. But they do not know that it is an institution. It is a culture. If we criticize the law, doesn't mean that we demolish the courts. Similarly with journalism. And also I'm telling my own colleagues in the universities that we want to extend ourselves. We extend through the op-ed pages. We write opinions. And don't think that opinions are just any kind of writing. Opinions are written by people who are intellectuals, apart from editors. So again, journalists are also intellectuals. And here we have two public intellectuals. If we look at the journalism before World War II in both Singapore, Malaya, and Indonesia, we find that They are all public intellectuals. Roth identified themselves as the intelligentsia, where they led society, they create opinion for society, and they forge the movement towards independence. Without journalism, both Malaysia and Indonesia would not be able to achieve independence, regardless of whatever ways, whatever means that there is. So also, one of the important thing is in Malaysia is to recognize journalists and to create the category of pejuang wartawan. If we have pejuang politik and pejuang sastrawan, why can't we have pejuang wartawan? It is a way to recognize and to pay tribute to the people who write. And when we write, actually we hold power. When we write, we represent things. And this is what is lacking in Malaysia. In Indonesia, they have recognized a number of people who write, journalists, as pejuang negara. Pak Azrin, he's from my friend or my mentor over the last many decades. His name appeared in the university that when I was a student, he was already a professor there. This was 40 years back. Like Rasuna Said, and 2 years back, I think there's Ade Negoro and a few others. They are recognized in Indonesia as pejuang negara. So I thought that when I look at the history of journalism as an institution, as a profession, as a culture in Malaysia, I think that's what we should do. And we look at Ismail and Haji Said. These are also statesmen. Again, we need to pay tribute to them and elevate their position as that. So what I'll do is to introduce or reintroduce Sama Ismail. But before that, I forgot. This is a precursor for another event on A. Sama Ismail, which inshallah is to be held in February of 2024. Earlier, I wanted to have this in conjunction with the demise of A. Sama Ismail. He passed away in 4th September 2008. So I wanted to have this in September or October, but there are quite a number of events in ISTAC, so I cannot push it. But I want to have a bigger event, a symposium in commemoration of his demise in February. NST, Straits Times have promised to fund the symposium, and we have Zainal Sulaiman from Bernama, who is supporting us in some ways in terms of the logistics and the funding. So that will be a one-day event. We are finalizing speakers. There will be about 8 speakers. And we'll talk about Samad, including his books and his writings. One of the things which I faced when I was searching for people to speak about Samad, Pak Samad, is that they asked me, who's qualified to speak about Pak Samad? And when I mentioned the person, is he qualified? Then I asked back the person, then who's qualified? So again, I want to go beyond the anecdotes and the episodes with Samad Ismail. I've never worked under Samad. I've never worked never worked with him. I was not in the NST. I was in Bernama for 2.5 years. And but I have encounters with Samad Ismail in the 1990s. And one is I would invite him to be a guest lecturer in the courses that I taught in the journalism in UiTM. And 2 is in the 1990s, Samad, myself, and 1 or 2 others was engaged in organizing a workshop for a party newspaper, a party organ. Actually, that newspaper was just beginning, so we were asked to coach and train the newsroom and its editors. This was Harakah. So it was based in Setapak. So every now and then, after the Bengkel was some weeks, I would drive Samad from Setapak to PJ and it will be about 2 hours because in the evening traffic jams. So in those several times of driving Samad, I will ask him many questions, and he will tell stories to me. And one of the questions I asked, there are two questions actually. One in the car, I said, "Why were you arrested for the third time?" Actually, he was arrested, as recorded normally, for 2 times, but he was arrested 3 times or more. He refused to answer until the end. Okay? I persisted, but he refused to answer why he was arrested for the third time. And then in ITM, I asked him, "Why were you transferred to Jakarta in 1957? He again refused to answer. He was very angry at me. So this triggered my interest in him, and also I was reading this book, memoir of Pak Sako. Pak Sako was a journalist and writer, anti-colonial journalist, and Pak Samad, Pak Sako, and Ibrahim Yaakob and Kajai were together. Okay, it so happened that Samad lived long in different circumstances, but he admired Pak Sako, Ishak Haji Muhammad, and he admired also Rahim Kajai. But he didn't say that he admired Ibrahim Yaakob. He asked many questions about Ibrahim Yaakob. How Ibrahim Yaakob got 30,000 ringgit to buy Warta Melaya. And he questioned the position and role of Ibrahim Yaakob. This was, for those who are not familiar, this was in the 20s and 30s, the history of Malay journalism. And I was reading the foreword by Samad Ismail, and I discovered that there are more questions than answers that he has asked. Not me, but Samad asked many questions, including the problems that Pak Sako faced. Why was Pak Sako sacked from Utusan, for example? Why was who sponsored, or rather, why did Ibrahim Yaakob buy? Was Ibrahim Yaakob a spy for the Japanese or the British, or what? I mean, K. Kim said that Ibrahim Yaakob was a triple agent. So anyway, this also triggered me in the subject of Pak Samad. Anyway, today I'll just introduce you to the man. You can look. This is how Samad Ismail, or Tan Sri Samad Ismail looks like. 1925, 2008. He passed away on 4th September, and he was born in 18 April. And these are images of Samad. And this is a famous one. I like this one. He was the first editor of Berita Harian. He was, he was pushed out of, Utusan, and so he became a Berita Harian editor, and he led Berita Harian. Okay, these are some of the publication. This publication comprises essays written by him in the magazine Gila Gila. Gila Gila, as I think you know, magazine. This was in the 1990s. When this was written, Gila Gila is a satirical magazine. When this essay was written, nobody took note. But later they published the book, and this book is a small book, about 200 pages. I bought it for 160 ringgit. It seems that this book is no more in production. It has been sold for 70 ringgit, and I was unlucky, so I have to buy it for 160 ringgit because I want to study the essays. At that time, I was reading Gila Gila, but I did not take heed of the essays. And then this is another book, a Faistrif written about him, and this by A. Karim Abdullah. And this is the book which I first bought in 1987, which I use in my journalism classes, Samad Ismail, Journalism and Politics, organized by a historian, Chia Boon Keng. And this is Samad's memoir, published in 1993. And this is the latest book about him by academic in literature, Hegemony Kepengarangan, the hegemony of authorship, actually. How Samad was monolithic. You know, he he uh, he dominated the landscape of journalism, also literature, but more on journalism. But this is a study of his novels and his short stories. And this is an example of his story uh, published in 1968, and one is 1967. I'm reading this one, Tamasha Tinta. This is about journalism. So the point here is, we read his fiction, his novels, and his writings. He was very progressive and far ahead. He, at that time, before the establishment of journalism schools in Malaysia, first established in 1971, he was already talking about the training of journalists. He was talking about the molding of journalists and journalism, far ahead of others who only established the first journalism school in the country in 1971. So these are some of the publications. Now, I'll share with you some of the thinking and based on the certain writings of Pak Samad, one of whom was journalism laureate Johan Jaafar, Tan Sri Johan Jaafar, a leading journalist. He was given the title, endowed with the journalism laureate in Malaysia. Pak Samad was also a journalism laureate, the first in 1994. So Samad was a journalist, public intellectual. I would also like to mention a historian, because if you look at a number of these journalists, I was talking to Dato Chamel just now. The names Rojan Anwar, Mokhtar Lubis, and a number of others. They also record life, contemporary life. And Rojan Anwar, for example, wrote a little history of Indonesia, 3 volumes, about it in Jakarta. In other words, what we see is that tendency to write and to be a historian. Of course, Ahmad Adam may not agree. He said that only historians, or only actual historians, or those who graduate with a history degree can only write history. But journalists also write history. In the first place, journalism is the first draft of history. But then these people went beyond that. They become historians in their own right. Writer, language advocate, political activist, nationalist, and I would like to add this statesman. Samad was also involved in arms smuggling. He was supplying arms to Indonesia in I think 1946, 1947. When he was based in Singapore, there was this barter trading. So this was corroborated by the Indonesian ambassador to Malaysia in the 80s. Together, I don't remember the name, together they were supplying arms. So in other words, Samad was involved both in the stage of writing and political activism, and you can see militancy, in the struggle for independence for Malaysia and Indonesia. But when his wife heard that he was supplying arms, she said she wouldn't want to know that. Keep it away from her. He was arrested, according to some accounts, twice under the Internal Security Act. Once by the British in 1957, and later by the Malaysian government in the 60s. There's another one in the 70s, 78. I think he was arrested. I remember that time I was a first-year student. I remember his confession on TV that he was a communist. I think he was asked to say that he was a communist, and another journalist, Zam, told me that Ismail is a card-carrying communist, member of the Communist Party. I don't know if it's true or not, but it's in his book, Zainuddin Madin's book. He was a founding member of the Gerakan Angkatan Muda, many organizations, and the People's Action Party, the party that is ruling Singapore now, a close friend of Lee Kuan Yew. and also the National Association of Writers, PENA. And he was given the title Pejuang Sastra, meaning literature champion by the Malaysian government. But that was the only one, the first and only Pejuang Sastra given. After, I think 3 weeks after being given the Pejuang Sastra, he was arrested under security laws. And here I'm quoting Juan Jaafar, who wrote about Samad last year in the Vibes. There were three-parter. Juan Jaafar wrote that Samad was one of the most productive sastrawan, literary person the country has ever known. Pak Samad wrote 11 novels, more than 50 short stories, and numerous essays, literature, culture, and arts. And when Samad was arrested, at the time he was the managing editor of New Straits Times, the government made a statement that why they arrested him was because they were following his leaders in the NST, and they found that his leaders were subversive. I was thinking about that. I need to read back the leaders in the NST in the 70s and to see what Samad has written. So this again, discounting hundreds of leaders and opinions written by Samad, which would involve social commentary, political commentary, cultural commentary of Malaysia post 1969, and there was Malaysia 1969, post 1969. The decades of 70s and 80s was a vibrant period, very vibrant in terms of the emergence, the institution of new policy, new cultural policy, the congregation of Malay intellectuals, because the formation of universities, UKM and USM. So these Malay intellectuals got together and tried to forge the second phase of independence for the nation. So Samad was one of those. I mean, not one of those, but he was regarded as such. On hindsight, he'll be regarded as a very significant intellectual in those decades. Johan Jaafar went on to say that Samad was in a class of his own as a creative writer. As a political activist, very little is known about his involvement in PAP. This also needs to be explored. How he was involved in the formation of the political party in Singapore. And Pak Samad left me with a question that went unanswered on his arrest for the time, which I told us now. Quite correctly, to quote Johan, Samad has always been reluctant to tell all. I think his secrets went to his grave. To use Johan's phrase, there's always an air of mystery about him. The inscrutable Pak Samad. There was still many facets of his incredible life that are left untold. In his preface of his memoir, which I showed just now, this is what Samad wrote. Bagaimana pula saya harus menulis mengenai diri saya? Sekiranya saya agak membesarkan peranan saya sebagai wartawan atau sebagai pejuang politik atau sebagai budayawan, maka barangkali ada pula yang menuduh saya takbur, angkuh dan sombong. Kalau saya kurang menceritakan hal diri saya, maka saya tidak berlaku adil pada diri saya sendiri. Selain itu, ada pula hal-hal yang terlalu pahit mengenai perjuangan saya dan beberapa teman yang barangkali tidak dapat saya ceritakan. Ismail, 1993. Translation in English. How am I to write about myself? If I amplify my role as a journalist or a political fighter or a man of culture, perhaps there will be those who accuse me of being boastful, conceited, and arrogant. If I speak less about myself, I would not be fair to myself. Other than that, there are things that are too painful about my struggle and that of my friends, which I am unable to tell. So this is Samad Ismail. Samad also should be seen, this has been mentioned, but have not been really taken up, as an anti-colonial fighter. He was critical of colonialism. He was very much conscious of British and Dutch colonialism. He was anti-colonial in his writings, together with Ibrahim Yaakob and Pak Sako. And this is what I think we see how he is associated with Ibrahim Yaakob and the Kesatuan Melayu Muda, Young Malays Union, and with many Indonesians he met during the occupation. He identified closely with the revolution in Indonesia between 1946 and 1949. And Ibrahim Yaakob, his colleague at the time, was a member of the Indonesian revolutionary government. He left Malaya and went to Indonesia, became rich. He became a banker. Ibrahim Yaakob. I think his granddaughter is in Jakarta now. In Singapore, Samad arranged for commodities, as well as arms smuggling. Apart from smuggling of arms, there was also supplying rubber, charcoal, fish, and socks, boots, and typewriters in the periods of Indonesia's independence, based in Singapore. He secured funds and safe passage for representatives of the Indonesian revolutionary government to the US, where the UN was meeting. He promoted the cause of Indonesian independence to political parties in Malaya and Singapore, including UMNO and its founder, Dato Jaafar. Samad was also a part-time correspondent for Indonesia's Antara. When he was in Singapore. Actually, in Singapore at that time, it was Samad. There's another one, Saado Jubil. He was counsel. He was holding a brief for Indonesians at the Indonesian embassy, and Singapore was a hub of political activism. And where was Antara placed in Singapore? It was in the office of Utusan Melayu. So again, these are the episodes in history that we need to know. And if you look at Singapore, Singapore was the hub of Malay. It's a Malay intellectual hub. It's a hub for Malay intellectualism, hub for Malay journalism and writing from 1876 until World War II. It's also a hub for the transmission of Islamic consciousness through reform newspapers, starting with Al-Imam and many others. So that vehicle was placed in Singapore. Samad was also mentioned in the Sukarno speech in some years later, where Sukarno paid tribute to the role of Samad in getting Indonesia's independence. In Utusan Melayu, actually Samad was, again, if you look at the history of Utusan Melayu, the first Malay newspaper, the first Malay-sponsored, Malay-funded newspaper. When we say Malay newspapers, again, there are certain problems. Malay historians and Malay nationalists and Malay scholars would not want to admit this. That when we talk about Jayu Peranakan until World War II, these are Malay language newspapers, sponsored and led by the Hadramis and the Jawi Peranakan, Indian Muslims, Jawi Peranakan. But they write in Malay. They're sponsored and funded. The first Malay-sponsored and Malay-funded and Malay-led newspaper was Utusan Melayu, 1939. There was another Utusan Melayu, 1907, established by Yunus Abdullah from the Kesatuan Melayu Singapura. But what happened was that the Utusan Melayu 1938-39 was also triggered by discussions in Singapore and Johor by those people who were involved in the first Malay political party, that was Kesatuan Melayu Singapura. And in the narrative, there are several names. Samad's name was not mentioned, and his father's name was not mentioned. So in this book, Samad implied that he was also involved in the founding of Utusan Melayu, because much of the discussions took place in his father's house, meaning his house. At the time, he was, I think, 7, 8 years old. So, even Ibrahim Yaakob, not mentioned, because Ibrahim Yaakob was a leftist. Yeah, thank you. got Muhammad to be my timekeeper. There's no moderator. We moderate ourselves. So even Ibrahim Yaakob was not mentioned. So you see the nuances in the narrative of Malaysian history and politics. You are leftist or seen to be in the left wing, you're subdued. So Ibrahim Yaakob is not part of the picture of the formation of Utusan Melayu, which from 1939 to 1961 was a radical newspaper. It's radical. And throughout the 70s, it was playing a role. But now Utusan Melayu, the actual Utusan Melayu was it stopped publishing in about 5 years back. Now it's a new Utusan Melayu. But then Utusan Melayu was the newspaper for change and reform. It created the Malay elite. It created modern Malay society, and there was a Jawi version. Some students have asked me, does the Malay read Jawi or write Jawi anymore? I said the newspaper also has stopped publishing. I've also referred to a number of other writings, one of which is, and I have to read this. Why was the discourse on Samad muted, not accorded clear recognition as a prominent Malaysian intellectual? The reasons have to do with Malaysia's particular historical trajectory under British colonialism, wherein established elites continued in power before and after national independence. Established elites, in other words, the other side were also elites, but they were pushed aside. Ibrahim Yaakob and Mustafa Hussain, for example. Mustafa Hussain was the deputy president of the Kesatuan Melayu Muda. And at the time, there was this collaboration between Kesatuan Melayu Muda and Sukarno to declare independence of Malaya and Indonesia after the Japanese. But it did not happen in Malaya. There was Sukarno declared unilaterally that Indonesia got independence, but not Malaya. So again, there was this problem. I think there were personality problems between Ibrahim Yaakob and Mustafa Hussain. So Mustafa Hussain was a man who lost by one vote. If not, he would have been prime minister. But because he took the other side, he was a socialist, or he was on the left. So history forgot him. He still remembered Tengku Abdul Rahman, and hence, the rest is history. Wherein leftist politics were tarred with a communist brush and actively repudiated, wherein intellectual elites were co-opted into the ongoing nation-building project. And Samad was rather lucky because he was co-opted. He was ambivalent, but he was co-opted later, although he has faced his experience of rest. So intellectual elites are crucial here on both sides in facilitating change. And this is where we find a critical role for journalism and journalism as an institution. So Samad's experience having interwoven with these realities, being alleged as a subversive and being celebrated as an intellectual, or rather as a journalist and a literary person. Samad had first-hand experience of the complexities and difficulties of engaging in the public arena. He was also subject to changing societal understandings of the intellectual and his role. Whereas up to the mid-20s, journalists and editors were key intellectual figures involved in the nationalist cause. They are today generally not accorded the same recognition. So again, today I would say maybe over the last 30 years. In the 70s and 80s, yes, we find the prominent role of the Malay papers, Bitaran, Utusan, NST. But we look at them, in Malaysia, you have vernacular papers and you have the Malay papers, but there are only 3 Malay papers in Malaysia: Bitaran, Utusan, and Sinar, and they're not playing a role. They don't even have opinions. Leaders are of space in newspapers to represent the voice of the newspaper. But again, Utusan has faltered. Bentaharan does not have a leader. Sinar has a very poor, timid kind of voice. So one of the things is to rejuvenate this consciousness of the Malay newspaper, Malay journalism. So again, what we see since the 1800s from Abdullah Munshi and through the various identities and ethnicities, the important role of Malay journalist editors as intellectuals in directing the nation. All right, I think, yeah, basically there are many more, but I have to stop now. So that's essentially about Samad. This is to perhaps to reintroduce him to the public, to university students, to those who study journalism, and to the journalism teaching fraternity. I'm always telling them that if we want to advance the profession, we need to know the history of the profession. If not, we would not have any ideals, because these people are people of, they are modern men. Okay? They are modern men within certain periods from the 1800s until now. They were also people who graduated from Al-Azhar and from the Islamic Pondok, Islamic Madrasa and so on. But they were modern men, they were worldly men, they're cosmopolitan, and they drive the nation, they forge what we are now. So it's important to know these. And again, today is to introduce and reintroduce the personality of Ismail. With that, I end my presentation. But before that, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Dr. Mehmet Ozay. Dr. Mehmet is a lecturer, actually Professor Dr. Mehmet Ozay is a lecturer at the Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization. Between 2007 to 10, Dr. Mehmet Ozay became visiting lecturer in the Education Faculty and Postgraduate Studies at Islamic State University of Araniri in Aceh, and taught sociology and anthropology in the Department of Social Sciences and Politics at Shia Kuala University and Muhammadiyah University in Aceh. He has worked as a researcher and lecturer at the Faculty of Education in UTM in between 2010 and 2013. I first got to know him, I think, when I was in UTP, 2010, when he just joined UTP. Between postgraduate lecture works, he was awarded a research grant or research grants, one on colonial education, Malay language and nationalism, and traditional Islamic education in the Malay world, Aceh history and sociology by the UTM Research Center. He was his field is partly cultural history, socio-political aspects of journalism, cultural aspects of journalism. That's what we need. Yeah, we need this discourse on not only journalism as skill, but on the history and the cultural history of journalism. And there's a dearth of literature. Well, you can read some of my books, which I attempted to do that actually. From, well, it's not here. Yeah, one is here. The number. My latest one is published this year on countering the Western canon. And my first book in 2001 on the journalist as a scribe is also an attempt to represent the sociology and cultural history of journalism in Malaysia. But that manuscript was peddled to 7 publishers. They all say that this is on the skills of journalism. They did not read the manuscript. So at last I got it published. Anyway, it's out of print now. And Dr. Mehmet has worked under the Turkish national media, Anadolu Agency, the brother of Bernama, and Turkish radio and television, TRT. Before joining the humanities and social science at Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul, 2017 and 2021. He has a dozen books and more than 20 book chapters, and recently he published a book on the Ottoman and the Malay world. I think I'm the first to buy the book without his knowledge. His expertise is highly interdisciplinary in the field of social politics, history, and religio-anthropological field in Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, India, and other Pacific regions. With that, yeah, all over to you. Yeah. You see it?
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin wa salatu wa salamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Merican Hojam. Seems that it is easy subject, but it's very difficult. This is my third presentation about Al-Marhum Haji Mohammed Said. So, and the first over here to ISTAC community, our teacher, students, thank you very much. They are over here, and some other guests, welcome. Let me start something, reading a poet to reflect the aura of what we are talking. Let me share my screen. Sorry. Okay, so let me arrange my computer. So this is written by A.H. Lubis from Lubis clan in North Sumatra. Hati mashkul menjadi rawan, bulan purnama diliputi awan. Sama-sama merdeka banyaklah kawan, ketiga sengsara menentang lawan. Badan azab menderitai sengsara, jauh sahabat beserta saudara. Cita-cita di hati masih tertara, meskipun dalam neraka penjara. Indonesians alias manusia tentu ingin kesenangan dunia. Majulah saudara dengan setia, supaya Indonesia kembali mulia. Jangan khawatir menentang kesusahan, segeralah maju dengan perlahan. Rintangan sana ridalah tahan, agar lenyap perpecah belahan. Kalam lanjut saudaramu singkatkan, akhirnya sepatah saudaramu serukan. Rahmat tentu Allah kurniakan, asalkan pendirian saudara teguhkan. So translation is another time. So I think that our colleagues from Malaysia and Indonesia, they understand the meaning. So this is exactly during the time of independence, pre-independence year, and the struggle against the colonial regime. So Haji Mohammed Said, a journalist and intellectual. What I mean by this, Haji Mohammed Said, 1940, young gentleman, married with Ani Idrus from Padang, and they engage all these not only journalistic activities, but almost all intellectual activities they contributed, they initiated. My study about Mohammed Said, unfortunately, I could not contain Ani Idrus because this is another figure, another intellectual, so I could not cover just, I have been focusing on Mohammed Said since almost last year, August. So, well, Murad Merican Hojam emphasized significantly that how we decline the importance of journalism, not only contemporary one, but the journalists who sacrifice their life and their intellectual life pre-independent years. So I would like to add something new, different from my previous presentations, not just going on simply the life story of Mohammed Said, but something we need to input. So when I discuss with Murad Merican time to time, we come to a common understanding that this is very important. So my argument is that social change is in relevant societies, in particularly in Malay societies, the general Malay worlds, I call it, how they perceive these social changes. So the social changes means that by different groups of people, by different segments of society. Normally, when we consider that the social change, let's say, always I ask myself, how ulama, religious scholars, have perceived social change? Then I reflect the same question to the journalists and intellectuals, how they perceive the social change and how they responded and directed intentionally by their own efforts. So when the time comes to talk about culture and civilization, because we are in an institution, it has a name and title, civilization and thought, we always remember, rightfully, religious scholars. So my argument, my intention to provoke the minds, journalists and intellectuals are as much as equal the ones religious scholars by their efforts, by their thoughts, by their impact, influences on their respective societies. And this is very important, especially when we consider 1900 until 1947, 45, 17th August means that the independent year of Indonesia. We have significant examples that religious scholars divided, they supported to some or explicit or implicitly the colonial regime or their apparatus like Sunok Hagronj. On the other hand, so-called, in a contemporary understanding, we call, rightful or not, I'm not sure, secular, but Muslim journalists and intellectuals, they sacrifice everything for the ummah in their own geographies. So my argument is that journalists, intellectuals are significant actors in the context of contributing to reviving of Islamic culture and civilization. Why? When the time comes, Islamic thought and civilization, religious scholars and their works, their influences in societies and ummah, we refer to Maqasid al-Sharia, starting from Al-Ghazali 11th century onwards. But the significant elements of this Maqasid al-Sharia, life, lineage, wealth, religion, and intellect. So my emphasis is that these intellectuals, journalists, or journalists intellectuals created this intellectualism, means that they're using their own akal, their thought, their reason, then initiated something significantly to contain all ummah in their own specific respective geographies. Means that for independence course, they acted accordingly. Without appreciating their works, understanding and reinterpreting their works, I believe that we will fail to understand this specific period, means that 50 years, at least 50 years pre-independence era, Second World War. So these intellectuals and the journalists, their all attempts for the independence course created a society, directed social change, and implicitly or explicitly created an aura and social space for Maqasid Sharia. means that life for ummah under colonial regime or post-colonial regime. Lineage, wealth, economic struggles. I will give examples how Mohammed Said contributed significantly to the labor class in North Sumatra. And religion. So these are very important. Briefly, I need to develop, of course, these ideas, but briefly, I should focus on Maqasid Sharia, Islamic course, but through some other social agents. So historical condition means that these journalists were fighters at frontiers during the engagement with the colonial rules and rulers. They acquired the modern tools and ideologies, means that journalism, right, and nationalism. Please do not confuse your mind thinking contemporary nationalism and nationalism pre-independence period. This is totally different. I have some significant arguments. They connected to the past means that, let's say, some people call them secular people, right? Or separate, differentiate them from traditional religious scholars. But these people, in fact, were products of the traditional society. If you look at, Merican Hocam gave examples from Padang, almost all these gentlemen, starting from Tan Malaka, Rasuna Said, gentlewoman, Adi Negoro, Abdul Ruwai, they were the products of the Muslim families. Even their fathers or grandfathers, religious scholars. Means that they did not separate, have a distance between their own background, means that traditional religion, and move to another space, modernity. No, they had very significant root, very strong root, through their family, social environment, and through accumulated wisdom. So looking for balance between these journalists, intellectuals, and religious scholars, for the purpose of common good, for ummah and general public. So this is my argument. So modernity, Merican Hocam mentioned this modernity, referring to Bastin and Benda, very nice book published 1986. They are focusing on explaining how modernity emerged in Nusantara. Social change was mobilizing segments of the rural population, these journalists coming from rural sector, including Mohammed Said, into broader stream of anti-colonial agitation, whose centers were urban, means that Medan, means that Bukit Tinggi, means that Padang, means that Banda Aceh, etc., means that Batavia, right? Singapore, Hocam mentioned, whose centers were urban rather than rural, etc. These young Southeast Asians, including Nusantara Malay people, in quest of more modern values for members of new or newly literate social and occupational groups, such as native government and private employees, merchants and traders, as well as wealthier landowners, were funding traditional Moors, religious ones included inadequate to modern times. The journalists among these groups, newly emerging groups, later on I will focus, I think I will refer to Benedict Anderson. This newly emerging class, sociologically, had significant tools to act or react to the colonial course. And they inculcated their traditional values, merits, and merged with the modern ones. So this is, I guess, their strong part. So modernity, by modernity, a serial of change. What we mean modernity? I am a modern man, you are a modern woman. No, modernity is a Weltanschauung, a worldview, a philosophy. So how these young, newly emerging class, means that journalists, intellectuals, inculcated this new phenomenon. So by modernity, a serial of changes such as nation state, capitalist economy, technological and scientific developments, and cultural social changes occurred in the West. This is modern Weltanschauung, modern epistemology. But the second part of this story, and through colonialism, Dutch and British over in this geography, reach to the Muslim societies in respective geographies. A sort of dilemma is encountered related to these movements that are themselves modern developments or expression of modernity. So this is a dilemma we come across mostly in religious scholars, but we see a merging process in the minds and the actions of these journalist intellectuals. This is very important. That's why I intentionally argue that they give the direction of the change. They manage the direction. They did not leave anyone. So, harbingers of modernity. I call these journalist intellectuals as harbingers of modernity. Benedict Anderson argues rightfully about the schooling of the native children in Dutch schools. The young, educated individuals learned Dutch and knew more about the Netherlands. Not only Netherlands, the old Western ideologies, communism, socialism, until nationalism, but different branches of these schools of ideologies. Through schooling in institutions operated by the colonial governments here in Nusantara or Malay world and or in the Netherlands, because some of them educated and continued their life, or let's say Abdul Ruwai, Tan Malaka, Mohammed Hatta, but not Mohammed Said. So this is one of his unique aspects. He didn't visit in early ages. Later on, he visited 49. So, okay, let me find my notes. Okay, I will not discuss anything about nationalism. All of us, I think, aware of it. Yes, journalists, well, anschauen, what they propose, through which they engage their societies, what they wanted the society to do for themselves. All these many questions come to our minds. Journalists were the transformers who became harbingers of modernization and moderators. This is very important. Moderators between past traditional and Islamic religious societal life and the new modern society. This is very important. Even today, there's significant discussion going around in Ummah and the West who study Islamic societies, means that us, they have not decided we modernize or not. We have not decided we should modernize ourselves or not. But some group of people, intellectuals, journalists, decided already and gave direction to this process. Before the expansion of the vernacular press, means that Bahasa Melayu, public talk, ceramah, the traditional propaganda mechanism was actively utilized by local and regional leaders. For instance, Muhammad Samin, who was the representing body of Muhammadiyah in North Sumatra, was an influential orator in his public talks and witnessed and became a role model for Muhammad Said. So this is the background, one of the simple examples, how Muhammad Said was raised, by which power, by which intellectuality. He followed up this intellectual discourse in ceramah and plus the published works. Journalism in North Sumatra, narrowing down to his own zone. Journalism was a novel, new mechanism to transmit new ideas. Again, I mean, I'm referring to Murad Merican. He informed us about Al-Imam, its connection with the Egyptian intellectuals, Muslims, new ideas. But Nusantara people, Malay people, were not just limited themselves by looking at these Egyptian sources. They had their own values, they had their own thoughts, they had their own traditions in struggle, physical and intellectual. So journalism was a novel mechanism to transmit new ideas and thoughts to more significant segments to local society. So their engagement with their societies, that's in the context of North Sumatra. Muhammad Said published, contributed some journals I will mention later on, and he initiated Waspada. He connected himself through this medium to the general public. Since 1856, means the mid of 19th century, when the time Dutch engaged significantly from the South Sumatra till the North Sumatra, physical, territorial occupation. Dutch colonial administration applied a legal basis for the publication processes. They were very smart. They not banned, but they restricted the journalistic activities and revised the rules and regulations, because after 1870, just before the Dutch war in Aceh, they released that because of liberal approach in Europe, they reflected these rules to Nusantara. Beginning of the 20th century, 1906, they liberalized the journalistic activities. Then we see significantly, gradually, the improving of journalism, even the numbers, quantity, and quality. Journalism as a novel institution, because of modernity, imported idea, was disseminating news and was a platform of intellectual discussions and including anti-colonial discourse. Please remember Luby's poem at the beginning I just read. This process emerged in North Sumatra, commencing from the early years of the 20th century through the local intellectual individuals' ventures in this field. Let's say the newspapers examples, the ones Mohammed Said worked during his young age, Penyadar, Sinar Deli, Pevarta Deli, Utsan Sumatra, were among them at which Haji Mohammed Said contributed through in various levels in his young ages. So this is Mohammed Said. He was born 17th August 1905, the same date of independence of Indonesia. There is a miracle or not, I'm not sure. And he passed away 26 April 1995. So as Antenorate stated that he observed, witnessed, he was a real 20th century man because of his age. And I try to propose a genealogy by the permission of Merican Hocam, genealogy of journalist intellectuals in the context of at least Sumatra. And we can extend this later on after we work. Abdul Rwai, he was born 67, and during his early 30s visited Dutch because of further medical education, but he sidelined his medical education and he intervened or influenced contributed the journalism published by a Dutch bureaucrat who worked in Batavia before. So he became a contributor to Bendara Volonda. So this newspaper published in Amsterdam, distributed in Nusantara. So the second step of this genealogy, Jamaluddin Adinegoro, almost the same, the same generation of Mohammed Said, but seems that more caliber, more professional. I believe that Mohammed Said learned more from him and improved himself. And the third one is Jamaluddin Adinegoro, also very prominent journalist from Medan. He started his journey from West Sumatra, Medan, Jakarta, then Germany. He studied professional journalism in Germany. Mohammed Said from Medan. He was born in Labuhan Bilik, just 2-3 hours down to south from Medan. And this is Chinpo, one of the earliest, the first journal Mohammed Said engaged as a young apprentice journalist. Chinpo, published by a Chinese investor, bilingual newspaper, and the Mohammed Said first experiences acquired from this journal, Chinpo. So there are some other versions of Chinpo in Batavia as well. The second one is Pevarta Deli. The third one is Utusan Sumatra. In 1929, he worked briefly in this Utusan Sumatra. Then he quit it because of ideological differences with the owner of this newspaper. Then his own venture, journalistic and intellectual venture, Waspada, just after the independence, 47, this journal started to be published until today. This is the second biggest in terms of quality and quantity, in terms of the longevity in Indonesian context, the second biggest newspaper we can call it. So we look at the title. I got this 28 February 1949 issue. Nomor 587, Suara Merdeka. So the voice of independence. Harian Bangsa Indonesia. So referring to Indonesian nation, Bangsa. These are very modern terms. Very modern terms. Probably we could not find out some other, earlier I mentioned some other group, they could not pronounce easily, but this is values, new modern values. Harian Bangsa Indonesia. So Muhammad Said was Ketua Umum of this newspaper. So why Muhammad Said? The question should be taken into consideration in line with some other, for instance, where was he raised and grown? How did he acquire education and build himself? So here, a kind of linguistic shift I propose again. I would like to utilize German concept Bildung rather than English word autodidact. So he was self-learned person, self-taught person, but I found that this Bildung German concept quite containing more than autodidact. So since it is a consensus that Haji Muhammad Said had a long self-taught process throughout his life, I guess that is the one made him unique among the similar names who lived during the same era. So Haji Muhammad Said turned out to be journalist and intellectual independence and during the revolutionary history of Indonesia. Revolutionary history means that the physical revolution between 1945 1949 December, because Dutch, with the contribution, significant assistance of the British and the United States, reoccupied or tried to reoccupy Nusantara. So during that time, they struggled, and Muhammad Said contributed to this struggle through his journalism and waspada. He was a visible member of these journalists because he contained the labor issues, independence discourse, etc., and historical studies. His struggle to overcome inertia, which was strongly felt, was illiterate masses, masyarakat di Nusantara. His venture as media was targeted to enlighten the people, the masses, why rational logic and truth based on historical and contemporary issues and developments. So I refer here what intellectual means. Karl Mannheim, a Marxist German scholar. The mind of intellectuals is characterized by empathy, the capacity to look beyond appearances and penetration. So Muhammad Said and some other names I mentioned, they are caliber enough to be called intellectuals because of their empathy to their nation, to Merdeka, independence, and to their histories, reviving their histories, and opening public space for Ummah. Structural processes conducive to this kind of mental orientation is communication between diverse groups. So Muhammad Said was not restricted himself a certain group. He was not a man of any groups, any political parties, any religious affiliations. During that time, there are multiple movements, but he was, I guess, in the middle and approaching to all these relevant groups in North Sumatra and in Java. So he is, this is one of his significant characteristics. That is the most important factor in shaping intellectual outlooks to the real meaning of things based on the understanding of Karl Mannheim. So, yes, his nationalism. So again, please remember my previous statement that we should not confuse our mind, the nationalism, the meaning of nationalism today, and pre-independencies. This is totally different. My argumentation I wrote before in the different conferences. Communism, including communism, socialism, another version of this leftist ideology, nationalism, and Islam were merged in the minds of intellectual journalists in Nusantara, at least in my example, Mohammed Said. So the idea, or they united intentionally for the same purpose, means that independence. What happened after 1950, we will discuss. Even Mohammed Said himself discussed significantly in his writings, in his observations. So Mohammed Said had a similar political stance like Sukarno in terms of observing the scope of Indonesian nationalism. So Sukarno visited, I guess, the first time 1929 when Mohammed Said was a reporter in Utusan, Sumatra. He was initiating, propagandizing this PNI, Partai Nasional Indonesia in Medan. This is also noted by Arifin Omar, student of Anthony Reid and significant political intellectual, I guess, in Malaysia. During my interview with him, and if one compares the idea of Sukarno, which is referred in some sources, and the political discourse of Haji Mohammed Said, it will be clearly observed the similarity. Thank you. And it is not, again, Sukarno before 49, not Sukarno after 1950. Okay, so these periods are very important. The personal histories of these individuals are very important as well. And it is not surprising that just after the independence, recognized by the United Nations, Haji Mohammed Said became member of the Nationalist Party. Okay, so because Merican Hocam asked me he was politician or not. So very briefly, he was picked up by the leaders because of his intellectual caliber. So Sukarno exercised basics and fundamentals of nationalism by expressing all relevant and diverse ethnic structures in Nusantara to be united for a common purpose, namely Indonesia. So he argues consciously the frame of nationalism as follows. Now it must be explained what it means to be native or the Indonesian nation. So nationalism has various goals. There are those who want to build native Sumatra, native Pasundan, native Java, native Celebes. So he is counting the ethnicities in different geographies in Nusantara. But at the end of the day, the intention is creation of a nation state, means that Indonesia. Okay. So intellectual works, we count, stated some portions of his journalistic activities, but I would like to introduce some of his significant works. He was not just a journalist, not reporter, not editor, not owner of a newspaper, but beyond this, he engaged historical studies significantly because of this colonial condition, colonial circumstances. How to overcome this colonial condition without engaging your history, without engaging your people, without engaging your religion and tradition. So Mohammed Said gave examples, almost I count 20, almost 20 books. He published, starting from the Aceh history, 2 volumes of Aceh Sepanjang Abad, throughout the centuries Aceh, 2 volumes. The second volume is only Dutch war between 1873 and 1904 officially ended, but the war continued until the Second World War. So this is the only book in the beginning of this century, 2005, when I entered the library of Shah Kuala in Banda Aceh. I was searching naturally or emotionally Turks, Ottomans connection to Aceh. Of course, my language barrier, I just checked the index. When I pick up Ottomans, I got happier. But later on, I asked myself, who is Mohammed Said? I assumed that he was one of the Acehnese. But later on, I discovered that he was not Acehnese. This is very interesting because of historical political conditions in Aceh, at least 2005 agreement, peace agreement. So Mohammed Said was a North Sumatranese, but he engaged Aceh history principally intentionally. So Singamaraja, he provocatively studied research about the Batak leader. This is very interesting work. And he initiated a conference, a seminar in North Sumatra, 1963, Islamization of Archipelago, we can summarize. Kesimpulan seminar sejarah masuknya Islam ke Indonesia di Medan. So the participants very important. Abdul Malik Karim Amrullah means that Hamka, almarhum. MD Mansur, Muhammad Said, Dr. Tujima, Nasution, and other clan from North Sumatra, and the other names. Ali Hashmi, referring to this seminar, he's telling that before us, before Acehnese, Muhammad Said, as an intellectual, not probably in the context of Islamists, he engaged the history of Islam in Sumatra. So he, starting from his early journalistic activities, he observed, even before being a journalist, he was an assistant clerk in the Dutch legal office in Panay, North Sumatra. He worked almost 3 years voluntarily, it is mentioned, in different stages. What's the function of this legal office? They observe the labor class in plantations, rubber and tobacco. The famous, that's why these two products made North Sumatra, especially Medan, as a dollar city. It became famous globally, not only in the context of Nusantara, but it became globalized. And one of the reasons why Medan became globalized because of the work of Muhammad Said. He wrote about Kuli contract Tempo Dulu. He faced the realities of this Kuli, means that labor class, mostly from Javanese, initially a small number of Chinese taken from Penang, but later on it converted to Javanese, and a small number of Tamil. He observed and he advocated this labor class. So I asked in previous conference, should we call him a socialist, communist, because of labor class engagement? No, he was looking for justice. He was looking for truth. He initially, before being a migrant in Medan, he discussed briefly with his father. I'm going, father, to Medan. Father did not agree upon this decision. He rejected kindly. He said, I will follow up the truth and disseminate truth to people. He set his mind before leaving his kampung, Labuhan. So this is one of the significant product of him, of his intellectual caliber. So some other works, but what the background of this, what the initiation of this work, because he was looking for truth, number one, as I mentioned. Number two, justice, very important. Number three, rakyat. So these are the concepts he inculcated, he acquired throughout his learning process, witnessing the trauma of like the people, Muhammad Samin and the others. Then he engaged significantly, promoted, advocated these concepts. So justice system very important in his ideas. Koli contract, nationalism, Pavartadeli, Waspada. Yes, I am passing this one because I have 54 slides. So this is the one seminar Sejarah Masuk dan Berkembangan Islam di Aceh. This is the second seminar conducted by the efforts of Ali Hashmi. He was a governor at the time in Aceh, I think after his being governor, and he invited Muhammad Said because he experienced in this seminar. So some significant names over here, Tamrin as Ismuha, Zakaria Ahmad, including one British Lance Castle, Australian, was the ones among these attendees. So Muhammad Said was honored by Aceh government during the time of Ali Hashmi. He was the governor. He appreciated his efforts, intellectual efforts, because of his book published, the first Jilid, volume 1961. So Muhammad Ali Hashmi was very close friend of him, some other intellectuals and the politicians from Aceh. He stated in a book, Ali Hashimi, waspada dan Aceh tak bisa dipisahkan keduanya saling memberi kontribusi yang positif. We cannot separate Aceh and Waspada. Waspada is a newspaper. Aceh is a region. Waktu saya gubernur, saya imbau supaya kantor-kantor pemerintah TK 1 dan 2 dan juga rakyat berlangganan harian Waspada Medan. He ordered when he was at governor, the bureaucratic agencies and the dinas in Aceh got this book, newspaper, including he suggested the people. Menurut Ali Hashimi, Waspada adalah harian yang paling mengetahui tentang misi dan visi Pemda Aceh setelah kemerdekaan. He said Waspada is we have the same mission and vision with Waspada after kemerdekaan. That's why he promoted Waspada as a newspaper, as intellectual medium in Aceh society. So this is one of the day before he passed away, Mahrum, Muhammad Said. Okay, so this is the summary of his works. Some of them I just quoted over here. I believe that we can learn more about his intellectual stance and his intellectual contributions throughout his own opinion writings in Waspada. He constantly wrote until he passed away in 1980s, but of course, gradually lesser and lesser. But his books still exist. I believe that some universities, not Sumatra University or his family, Waspada still exists, Medan, or we over here in ISTAC-IIUM republish his work or interpret and study his studies. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Mehmet. There was a rendition, interesting rendition of the sociological perspective of a journalist, Haji Muhammad Said. And Dr. Mehmet has framed it within the context of the theorizing the intellectual, which will be very useful in our discourse, in our future discourses in the ISTAC. With that, I open the floor to comments and questions. We have some online, but I giving priority to those who are here, our postgraduate students and Dr. Ismail and Professor Ozay and Zainal, these are my colleagues, and the rest. Yeah.
If you do not ask question, I will ask to you. This is my best. Sorry.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Where they will these two guys. And I
Yeah.
Where was he born?
He was born in Labuhan Bilik, just 2-3 hours down to south from Medan. But he is Mandailing, originally. Mandailing.
Mandailing.
Sama Ismail is 18 April 1924 in Singapore. Sama Ismail was his father was Javanese. Mother, I think Javanese. I think Javanese. Yeah, Javanese. He married a Mandailing, but his mother is Javanese. Yeah, and also talking about genealogy, I think it's a very interesting approach. Samad's father and grandfather were religious teachers. Yeah, his father and his grandfather was teaching madrasah and very ulama, I would say, and from there you can see the spirit of the man also he has inherited in a different way. Yeah.
Prof. Murad, I think it is good idea to recognize journalists as intellectuals, but do you think that other sectors of society will accept that effort and recognize them as public, you put it, public intellectuals? Can you identify what are the characteristics of public intellectuals?
When I say public intellectual here, I'm mainly referring to Samad. Intellectuals are people who study or focus on certain areas and certain problems of society. Academics are intellectuals, teachers are intellectuals, professors are intellectuals, politicians also are, but not necessarily public intellectuals. For example, to make a distinction, in the universities, not everybody in the university, not all professors are public intellectuals. If a professor professes a certain discipline, teachers do research and write for journals, yeah, that professor professes, yes, he's a scholar, but he doesn't share and extend his views, he doesn't express in the public domain. So in other words, intellectual or public intellectual goes beyond the calling of his or her profession. The public intellectual addresses problems of society, problems of civilization, problems of the nation, and tries to approach options to overcome those problems, engages with society, and opens up ideas to society through different forms of advocacy. Well, for example, a normal example is through writing. Kalau a professor writes in journal, which only his peers read, a public intellectual expresses and voices through the media. Op-ed pages, for example, the editorial pages are the fodder or the space for public intellectual. And you can find that this is a tradition in Europe and America, especially Western Europe, America, where scholars, professors, Nobel Prize winners, they write for the media. They become storytellers. The op-ed pages are their space where ideas can be contested, can be debated, can be publicized. It's not just publicized, but contested and debated. But in Malaysia, this has not been fully realized, and because, as I said, professors and scholars they look down on journalism and newspapers. They say that newspaper, we talk about physical newspaper, is good for wrapping fish. This is again the idea which is still relevant now, although and also now it becomes worse because to them journalism is social media. I think this needs to be corrected. Even journalists also, social media is not journalism. Social media is where this is technology and it opens up space for people to express. But the journalism is different. Journalism need not necessarily be a part of social media, although when you write for newspapers, it migrates into what we call social media online. And when it is used by the public or abused by the public, then it becomes negative. But the point here is that when you talk about public intellectuals, they are concerned. They rise above the conventions of society. They make suggestions and they are engaged, not necessarily directly involved in public policies, but they engage in giving ideas. So that's a public intellectual. And Samad and Muhammad Said and quite a number of others can be labeled as public intellectuals. Not all journalists, not all editors, but my focus is to look into the function of editors and journalists in expressing social concerns, religious concerns before World War II. I think Roth identifies and calls them as intelligentsia. Perhaps we can debate on whether that the term public intellectual can be used, but certainly some of them would justify to be called public intellectuals. One of which is, I think, where Indonesia is concerned is Abdul Rifai and quite a number of others that Dr. Mehmet mentioned. Abdul Rifai was the first. Kita cakap dari kaum tua dan kaum muda, young old faction. The origin comes from Ahmad Rifai. He suggested that when he was in Holland. Bangsawan usul dan bangsawan fikir. So bangsawan usul refers to the kaum tua. Bangsawan fikir refers to kaum muda. So from that term bangsawan usul dan bangsawan fikir, maka the term kaum tua dan kaum muda was developed and used and popularized in Sumatra and also Java and in Malaya, especially in the 20s and 30s and 40s. So this is how why we call them public intellectuals. Can I go to a question? There's a question on YouTube. Let me read out. Yeah. Okay, go on. Yeah, can, sure. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Oh, salam. Your name, please?
Okay, my name is Muhammad Maruf Hassan. I'm from Usuluddin department. I'm doing my PhD. Okay, so my question about Samad Ismail and about Haji Muhammad Said. If we see Muhammad Asad and also Muhammad Iqbal, they use literary device to reflect what is happening in 20th century. So when you talk about like the journalism, they are contributing for the for this part, this area. I was like confused. These two persons, did they produce any literary device like poetry or maybe novel? Because I read last time the Bhumi Manusya, this art of mankind. So I see the reflection of how like Muslim laws, rules are being marginalized by the Das people. So is there something like that by these two scholars? Thank you so much.
In terms of literary works, I have not come across any works of Muhammad Said either in terms of poems or novel short stories, but the other fields which I mentioned, he contributed more. Thank you.
In where Samad Ismail is concerned, for those who study literature, Malay literature, you discover that he was the founder of this literary movement, Asas 50, in Malaysia in the 50s. When I was studying, when I was in school, we studied Asas 50, but the name Samad Ismail didn't come up. So only later they discovered that he was one of the mentors. He was not a member of Asas, he was a mentors who created other writers. Usman Awang, Christmas, he developed that as a reservoir to use literature as a tool for political emancipation. And so he nurtured through poetry, through short stories, terpin, through the novel. And all these novels, all these stories are actually a form of vehicle to create national consciousness. And this is what the movement is all about. It's not literature for literature's sake, but literature for society. So Samad was conscious. And these are carried through journalism. The newspapers were the vehicle, the wahana, the vehicle that caters and that publishes short stories and poetry, so that together with the essay would be a weapon to express anti-colonial feelings, to express nationalist feelings and political emancipation. So this is the idea, and where journalism in the Malay is concerned. In fact, from the beginning, but more so in the 1920s and 1910s that we have this. Short stories. It was also an invention. The cerpen, the short story, it was an invention coming from Penang, actually. So again, just to tie to your answer, there is this question here. How did World War II in 1914-1918, which led to the subsequent fall of the Osmaniyah Caliphate, the abolishment of the caliphate and Turkey Sultanate affect people like Samad and Muhammad Said?
So it's very
Yeah,
clear.
yeah.
I mentioned that these intellectuals in the sample of Samad and Said, they had their own resources over here. In the context of Ottoman's influences starting from Aceh, 16th century, 19th century, we or I have significantly different approaches. No emotional. As researchers, we should look at the data. We have concrete data, supportive documents, or not. Emotions, mythologies work till some place, but we should not prioritize mythologies. Number two, Ottomans ended 1908, not 1923. CUP, Central Union Progress Party, revolutionary way gained the power, and then they intentionally entered the First World War, and already Ottoman finished. Physically, biologically. 23 is a dot. No influence to Malaya, to Nusantara, neither Aceh, Sumatra, or Java. But interestingly, another research activity of mine, the Ottomans' image, Turkish image in Java newspapers, they continued to learn what was going on in that particular geography. They constantly follow up, either through their own reporters, even lesser number, or of course the Western media apparatus. But at the end of the day, we have this data in Jakarta archive, Javanese newspapers and the Sumatranese. But the reflection of political, cultural, or religious from late Ottoman, early Republican era, I, till now, not observed any significant things. But here, people, because of their intellectual caliber, they follow up the developments. Probably emotional, they were waiting something like Chinese, but nothing happened. We should convert this question. This is a wrong question. How Nusantara, Malay geography became successful in terms of independence struggle? What resources they had, how they implemented these resources together without the contribution of the Ottomans or early Republicans. Thank you.
Yeah, on the yeah.
Sorry, just one more point. I mean, what about the Hamka? I mean, in his writing, did he talk about like Ottoman Khilafah and the concept of, I mean, what is called Islamic civilization?
This is exactly what I meant at the very beginning. Khilafah ended sometime before. Nusantara people waiting someone in the new republic to become a Khalif, Mustafa Kemal. We observe in the writings in newspapers. But after 1924, Khalifa demolished, dynasty demolished, 1922. Then the people over here, intellectuals, including Chokra Aminoto, woken up. No any significant intellectual, religious, whatever, assistance from this geography. But I believe that my assumption, they rediscovered their powerful past. When we look at, let's say, in Malaysia, I have not heard the Pahlawan National concept, no any awards, including journalists or other politicians. But in Indonesia, there is concept and institution, Pahlawan Nasional. heroes of the nation. Each year they awarded the past leaders, including the journalists. So this is very important. I mean, we should ask correct questions. When Ottomans ended its political power, territorial power, intellectual power, then how the people over here or subcontinent or in Africa, without the assistance of this Khalifa, already become something not useful institutionally, how could these people find out solutions for their political conditions, under colonial conditions, etc.? So at the end of the day, we clearly see the success story over here. Independence already gained. Intellectual works already printed. We have the resources. And these are the proof. Thank you.
Yeah, the link between the Khalifa and the Malay Archipelago is quite interesting. In one aspect, based on the relationship between both sides, the Malay Archipelago is conceived to be the last frontier of the Ottoman Empire. This was conceived in the late 1800s, Sultan Abdul Hamid, and then the letters written. That's one. Second is that the developments in the Balkans, in Turkey, you said the fall of the Ottoman in 1908, isn't it? And the subsequent events which led to the Republic in 1924. So that those few decades awoken the consciousness of the Malays in the Malay Archipelago. Where the Malay Peninsula is concerned, earlier newspapers, for example, Tanjung Penegri, published in Penang, 1895, mentioned events that happened in the Balkans and in Turkey. And between that and World War II, there was a general sentiment of the Caliphate and the fall of the Caliphate and the Balkan Wars and the war between Turkey and Greece and Turkey and Russia. All these gave a certain picture that the Malays support the Turks. There was this, glorifying Turkish victory, rationalizing the power of the Turks, and hoping that the Caliphate will continue. So this appears in a number of Malay papers, Al-Imam, Al-Ikhwan, Saudara, and many of these cover the events in the Balkans. So again, if we see this, and these are mainly read in Singapore and Penang, where the peninsula is concerned. So when you look at the social history of the Malay Muslims in Singapore and Penang, you see that there is a tendency to subscribe to the values of the Caliphate. Whereas the Malays in the Malay states that have the Sultan, their loyalty, although they support the Caliphate, but their loyalty is more on the Sultan than Turkey. So this is what is reflected in the Malay newspapers before the war. And indirectly, and there's no direct influence to Ismail, but indirectly, we look at the two strands of journalism. One is as I've said, the reform journalism, the journalism that has inherited from Al-Manar and the reform movement from Muhammad Abduh, and many Malay newspapers from 1900 to World War II inherit those discourses. And then there's another one which was influenced by the Indonesian movement. This was has influenced directly Samad Ismail and Ibrahim Yaakob and so on. So, but again, if we look into the early formation of Indonesia in terms of the identity and so on, also triggered by the happenings in Turkey at that time. Yeah.
Assalamualaikum, Professor. I have a question. I'm a bit curious when you said just now earlier in your lecture that the role of these public intellectuals, journalists, they are somehow not acknowledged or looked down by our intellectuals in the academic sphere. It made me wonder, how could that happen? Is it their impact, and these journalists, their impact is not big until it is not recognized? And if their impacts were that significant and big, how could they be looked down upon by the intellectuals in the academic sphere?
Yeah.
They should have, recognized this impact. Even the government, gave awards, but somehow in the academic sphere, it is not acknowledged or looked down. So I'm just curious about the extent of the impact of our journalists, the journalists that we are talking about.
Yeah, can I answer this question? Yeah. Generally, you look at the image of journalists only in recent decades. I'm not talking about perception of universities at the time to journalists. Before the 80s, it was fine, but after the 80s, there is a misplaced understanding, a misplaced notion of journalism, because they see that journalism is they see the medium, it is printed in the cheapest paper, which is newsprint. Again, that logic. Second is that the image of journalists to many Malays is that ini jaga tapi kain orang. In other words, journalists are untidy, they talk loud, they are rude, and they write nonsense. And especially so when they are perceived to be partisan. So again, the political culture in Malaysia over the last 30 years have spoiled the image of journalism. Also, one of the reasons why Utusan Melayu or Utusan Malaysia stopped publication was because of the political situation in Malaysia. So that has created the response by academics, and moreover, academics and professors, they think that getting the publications papers published in academic journals are more prestigious than writing for the papers. So again, this is due to academic culture, and again also the present value of ranking, which does not recognize writing for newspapers. You get no points. You only get points and get promoted to be professors when you write for journals, peer-reviewed journals, and so on. But you don't get points or promotion when you write for newspapers. So again, this defeats the purpose of the role of the intellectual in society. Why do you write? We don't write for, we write for peer-reviewed, yes, but also we write for society. But the idea of ranking, the nature of ranking, the idea of competition among Malaysian universities have neglected the social impact of ideas and research.
Just a little comment, Professor. I think the society's culture of using the newspaper to wrap our nasi lemak somehow also degrades the role of journalism. These news, these articles are written by journalists and with very high intention, and then we use it to wrap our food.
Yeah.
And then just throw it away.
But
Somehow
some
it just
people reading
degrades.
this Nasi Lemak Bungkus paper, right?
Yeah, right.
Like Mohammed said in the past.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you're right. So that is actually the logic. The medium defines the message.
So one of my sources telling that the local voices, with the journalists, intellectuals, were often dismissed as nationalist, if not nativist, and have remained underexamined and unnoticed even by scholars located within the regions themselves. So, I mean, that's why our humble attempt to reintroduce this past and these figures, to find out a balance. For instance, how many of religious scholars or religious scholarly works mentioning these people, these individuals. And the second one, there is a power relationships, of course, in society. I mean, political circles, they have their own agencies, and the journalists are independent people, freedom fighters. So the public space is disputed area. I mean, nobody can easily give another one intentionally. So this is a kind of struggle, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, one more question. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, both of the speakers, to share the brave intellectual journalist stories here. It's very much learning to me. For instance, a question is because we knew that a human and a society is complex by its nature. So, what measures can be taken to combat misinformation and disinformation in the context of societal change?
To combat misinformation,
Because
disinformation.
it's the journalist's duty, because the data you share, it's worthy. And you both shared that manuscripts, the old manuscripts. So that it means whatever should be written nowadays, that are the history for our upcoming generation. So what should be taken? But measure should be taken that we should share truthfulness regarding the societal change, because we know that the paper that you share, these papers in future we can't see even, because in Pakistan, I know in my country there are many big papers that they are not more than now only 100 papers, that only for the honorary printing. It's not no more than in the form of paper.
We're talking about the evolution of the physical newspaper.
Yes,
to,
even the evolution of
online,
the
yeah.
physical, yes,
Yeah,
even
online.
and also with the technological advancement, we are facing drastic societal change. So
Okay.
the journalists have a much more responsibility, that they show how they could, what kind of measures they should take to to combat this responsibility.
Maybe two measures. One is that the journalists must be clear on this distinction between social media and journalism. Okay? Because the problem here is of the use and consumption of what we call social media, the platform of social media, the digital platform, and where anybody can write, everybody can write, everybody can express, like Asian, everybody can fly. So that's what happened post 1996. So journalism organizations must be firm and make a clear distinction. Do not be bothered, do not be encumbered by the thinking that social media is also journalism. Social media competes with journalism. Social media doesn't compete with journalism. Okay, that's one. Second is that this has been discussed in Europe 30 years ago, actually, before the advent of social media, that there has to be a time when we have to redefine what journalism is. And the authority of opinions, because journalism, there are two spheres. One is news, the other is opinion. It's not only news. What people condescend is, oh, news. News tak betul, right, correct. But the other side is opinion. And this is where we're talking about. So, authoritative opinions, opinion means arguments, debates, critical reviews and essays, must come from the profession of journalism, in other words, or people who are qualified, or people who have some standing or some idea. It should not come from anybody. The man in the street should not be trusted in terms of the credibility of opinion given through social media, because he's not a journalist and he cannot write as such. So I think there has to be some kind of distinction, some kind of dialogue and discussion among the journalistic fraternity and other related bodies on the definition of journalism. So when we read the papers or when we consume the social media or journalistic content, then we know that they are written by people who are defined as journalists. Therefore, we look at that as authority. Of course, we're not talking about difference of opinion. We're talking about the nature of either that opinion is the false news or false way of looking at things, false information, in other words. Okay. So that's maybe those are the two things to combat false news. I'm not too sure whether this is a valid suggestion, but I think there has to be from the point of view of journalists. Because journalists, why I'm saying this, because journalists in Malaysia, if you ask journalists in Malaysia, they're not too sure. They say that social news is a threat to journalism. I said no. If we make a distinction that is different from journalism, it's not a threat. We have to be clear. And that's why Putusan Malaysia falters, because they're not clear. Editors themselves are not clear. I'm sorry, I'm quite critical of journalists in Malaysia. Maybe not in Indonesia, I don't know. Yeah? Anyway.
No, actually, this issue has been discussed even 35 years ago. We had, in fact, I was involved in organizing a workshop, which NST also participated. It is organized with Panama and EMIC at the time. During at the time the coming of the internet-based media and whatnot, So at that time, I think even the main newspapers already were concerned, worried about, and even for that matter, even TV station, how many TV stations closed because of the how to compete, But some or other they don't take it seriously. Like Panama, we are lucky because we have been online service from day one. So that is not, you're not affected by that. So, if they could take seriously how to manage this, maybe it didn't happen this way. Yeah, that was about, I think I remember doing it something in 1995. We have a serious workshop at Mingkok Hotel. And, but the thing didn't, even if Susan editor then was worried, and some even, so many TV stations closed. So we have to really, how to tell the public, how to make the public understand what is news and what is just information, or this. This is something I think we have not reached that yet. And today.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
So I think the readers must be more smarter than journalists, right? So journalism, journals, newspapers were the apparatus in pre-Enlightenment process in West Europe, starting from one single page, announcement, ideas, starting from Martin Luther, right? The Protestant Declaration, etc. So in Indonesian context, there is PWI, Persatuan Wartawan Indonesia, institutionalized. So they have their own rules and regulations. At the same time, there is another concept. So we should think the other way. Pers Bebas. Pers Bebas is a concept even used during the time of colonial struggle, during the time of Muhammad Said. Still a prominent concept. And current government also supporting this Pers Bebas, means that free media, but responsible media. So they have throughout these agencies, PWI, Persatuan Wartawan Indonesia, and some other bodies, Antara, a national news agency, they have on their channels to distribute a significant reliable sources. But at the same time, as you mentioned, fake news is not a new concept. Fake news since the beginning of over here. So it means that as audience, as readers, we should be smarter. Social media is something totally different. But journalism is very intellectual activity. We should pick up who is a reliable writer, who is not. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think we thank you for your questions, comments, and participation. We appreciate that. But one thing that we need to take away, bring out is that with regard to example, Sama Said and Sama Ismail and Muhammad Said, they enlightened society. So one of the, you see, we're talking about modern civilization is the role of the public intellectual, and it's important that public intellectual functions as a beacon for enlightenment. And this is what we see in these two figures, and also what we will see in those in the history before World War II. After this session, hopefully, inshallah, every month we'll have similar sessions. Make it informal. I think a group of what 20 or 30, which is nice, on different topics. We will alternate. Maybe it's like this, both of us will speak, or we alternate one of us on different topics about journalism and in relation to civilization and public enlightenment, I say. I think it's not only important for Malaysia, Indonesia, but for the rest of the world. So, but here the focus on the Malay archipelago. So thank you very much. I hope we learned something for today, a small way to keep the conversation going on journalism. Thank you. Assalamualaikum. Please have refreshments. I think they're still on.